When I moved into the rental house, it felt like a good deal. Too good, maybe. The neighborhood was quiet, the rent was low for the area, and the place was mostly furnished. The landlord was a little too eager to get the paperwork signed, but I brushed it off. I needed the place, and honestly, I just wanted to settle in and start fresh. It was a one-story house, 3 bedrooms, small backyard, nothing fancy. What caught my eye early on was the hallway closet. Just a narrow door between the bathroom and the smallest bedroom, probably meant for coats and random junk. The weird thing about it, though, was the light inside. It had a pull chain bulb, the kind you tug on from underneath, and I noticed it was always on. I'd turn it off, close the door, walk away, and the next time I passed by, it'd be glowing again. At first, I thought maybe I was forgetting to pull it all the way, or maybe the chain was old and would slip back on. Still, it bugged me. I started pulling the chain deliberately, giving it a firm tug, sometimes even double-checking after. But somehow, the bulb would be on again later. I even tried unscrewing it a bit so it wouldn't make contact. That seemed to work for a few days, but then I found it screwed back in, lit, still glowing behind the closed door. I didn't tell anyone. Felt like such a stupid little thing. The rest of the house was fine. No noises at night, no signs of break-ins, nothing missing or moved. I figured maybe the wiring was just weird. Old house stuff. Then, one night, I think it was a Wednesday, I was brushing my teeth before bed, electric toothbrush buzzing in my mouth, when I heard a soft creak. A very slow, almost hesitant creak, like a door opening gently, came from the hallway. I stopped brushing, turned off the faucet, listened. Nothing for a few seconds. Then, a soft click, like the door eased back into place. Not slammed, just shut. I stepped into the hallway. It was dim, the only light coming from the bathroom behind me. The closet door was slightly open, maybe an inch, no more. I stood there for a moment, heart starting to race. Something about that narrow opening, that faint sliver of light leaking out, it didn't feel right. I backed into my bedroom, grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand, and returned. The hallway was still quiet. I opened the closet door fully. Just coats, a couple of my jackets, some empty boxes, a broom. Nothing that looked disturbed. I checked the ceiling for a vent, the floor for loose boards. Nothing. But then I noticed something small and odd. A strip of masking tape, beige, old-looking, stuck to the inside of the door frame. It was subtle, tucked right along the edge, easy to miss. I hadn't put it there. I didn't even own masking tape. I grabbed a Sharpie from the kitchen drawer and made a small dot on it. Just a little mark so I could tell if it moved. I pressed it down firmly again and closed the door. The next morning, I woke up, walked past the closet, and paused. I opened the door. The mark had moved. Not far, maybe half an inch lower, but I could tell. It was obvious. I stood there a while, just staring at it, trying to wrap my head around it. There was no one else in the house. No pets, no maintenance crew. I hadn't even had a visitor over since I moved in. I felt my stomach twist. That whole day I was on edge. I didn't leave for work. I didn't even go outside. I kept listening for sounds. I walked the house a dozen times, checking windows, doors, locks. Everything was still in place. Nothing looked broken or tampered with. But that tape, that little detail, kept eating at me. That night, I decided to stay up. Not just stay up, but sit in the living room in the dark, flashlight in hand, eyes on the hallway. The way the house was laid out, I could see the closet door from the couch if I kept the bedroom doors shut and the lights off. I turned everything off except for my phone screen brightness kept low, and waited. The house was quiet. No wind outside, no cars. Just me alone in that silence. Hours passed. Midnight, then 1 a.m. I started to doze off around 2, jolting myself awake every time my eyes drifted. At 3:11 a.m., I saw it. The closet door slowly creaked open. Not fast, just that same gentle, careful motion I'd heard before. A hand reached out. Thin fingers, pale skin. The hand felt wrong, too still, too deliberate. It reached up, peeled off the strip of masking tape, pulled something from a pocket, another strip, and carefully placed it just a little lower on the frame. Then the hand disappeared. The door clicked shut. I didn't move. My breath felt stuck in my throat. I could still hear the blood rushing in my ears. My body locked up. I stayed there, frozen for what felt like hours. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. When the sun started to rise, I picked up my phone and dialed 911. My voice shook as I tried to explain what I saw. I didn't care if it sounded crazy. I wasn't going back near that closet. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes. I met them outside, 2 officers. I walked them in, showed them the closet, told them what I'd seen. They didn't say much at first, just exchanged a look, drew their weapons and opened the door wide. Then one of them dropped to a knee and reached behind the coats and boxes. There was a hidden crawlspace panel. They pried it open. The space behind it was maybe 3 feet deep, like a shallow utility access tunnel between the walls. Dusty, smelled like mold and old wood. And in that tiny space, curled up and silent, was a man. Thin, dirty, filthy actually, clothes clinging to him like rags. I sunk in. He didn't resist, didn't speak, didn't move, just let them pull him out like a puppet with cut strings. He had no ID, no phone, nothing except a small backpack. Inside were a few granola bars, 2 bottles of water, and a notebook. They let me look through it briefly. My name was on the inside cover. The pages were filled with writing, small, neat, cramped. Notes about me, my schedule, what time I left for work, when I showered, what groceries I brought home, who I talked to on the phone, what music I listened to. He'd been living in the house before me, probably for weeks, maybe months. I'd moved into his hiding place. He must have been sleeping in that crawl space every night, sneaking out while I was gone, eating whatever he could, watching me from inside the walls. They took him away without a word. He never said anything, not to me, not to the cops, just kept his head down, eyes on the floor. After they left, I packed a bag and drove to a friend's place. I didn't sleep much for a while. The landlord later told me, once the investigation wrapped up, that the house had been vacant for 6 months before I moved in. But neighbors said they'd sometimes seen lights on at night. I didn't go back. I left the rest of my stuff behind, changed jobs, moved across the state. Every closet door I see now, I check twice, and I never, ever ignore a light that turns itself on. I live alone in a quiet 2-bedroom house at the end of a dead-end street. It's not the newest place, but it's home. The neighbors mostly keep to themselves, and it's usually peaceful. I don't have kids, but when my sister drops off my niece every few weeks, I use this old baby monitor I found at a yard sale to keep an ear out while she sleeps. It's not fancy, just a simple analog unit, no camera, no Wi-Fi. I only ever turn it on when my niece is visiting. Otherwise, it stays unplugged in the storage closet. That night, I was home alone. My niece hadn't visited in almost 2 weeks, and the monitor hadn't been touched since. I was lying in bed around 11:30 p.m., reading a paperback I'd been meaning to finish. The house was quiet. Too quiet, honestly. No street noise, no distant barking. Nothing but the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak from the cooling pipes. Then the baby monitor, sitting dead on my nightstand, clicked on. It made that soft, sharp static sound, like when you pick up a landline phone and someone's already on the other end. I stared at it for a second, confused. I hadn't touched it. It wasn't even plugged in. But sure enough, the LED light on the receiver was glowing a dim red. Then I heard it, just 2 words, low and clear. "He's awake." I sat bolt upright in bed. My skin went cold. I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake. That wasn't the TV. It wasn't some weird echo or memory. It was a voice, a male voice, and I was the only one in the house. I stared at the monitor, not moving. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Probably only a few seconds, but it felt longer. My brain started racing, trying to make sense of it. I picked up the receiver and turned the volume knob all the way down. Then I stood up, slowly, and walked to the hallway, the guest bedroom, my niece's room when she visits. was dark and untouched. I walked straight to the closet in the hallway, opened it, and found the other half of the baby monitor. The transmitter. The one with the microphone. It was plugged into the wall. I don't remember plugging it in. I yanked it out. I stood there in the hallway, breathing shallow, listening. Nothing. No voices. No static. Just the creaking of the wood floor under my feet. I tried to shake it off. I thought maybe I'd bumped it earlier without realizing. Maybe the thing had some old batteries in it, and a neighbor's baby monitor crossed frequencies or something. I knew it was unlikely. The range barely covered the house, and I didn't have any close neighbors with infants, but it was better than the alternative. I called a friend, put her on speaker. I told her what happened while I walked through every room in the house, turning on lights, checking closets, under the bed, even inside the washer and dryer. Nothing. Every door was locked. Every window was shut. Nothing was out of place. I even checked the attic pull-down. No signs of it having been opened. Eventually, I tried to laugh it off. My friend stayed on the line until I calmed down. I poured a glass of water, sat on the couch for a bit, then went back to bed. I left the monitor unplugged. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, every creak in the house suddenly louder. At some point, I convinced myself to try turning the monitor back on, to see if it would pick up anything, just to reassure myself that it had all been in my head. I got up, grabbed the transmitter, and plugged it back in. I put it in the hallway outside my bedroom door. I walked back into the room, turned the receiver on, and set it on the nightstand again. For a while, nothing happened, just silence. Then, after maybe 20 minutes, I heard whispering, faint, like someone speaking into it with their mouth covered. I couldn't make out the words at first. It was like breathy mumbling. Then one phrase came through, almost inaudible, but I heard it. Don't move. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood up, grabbed the receiver, and pulled the batteries out. My hands were shaking. I walked out of the room, unplugged the transmitter, and stuffed both pieces into a drawer in the kitchen. This wasn't interference. Someone was in my house, or had been, or had found a way to use that monitor without being inside. I didn't care how. I just knew I wasn't safe. I called the police. They arrived in about 15 minutes. I told them everything, even though I felt a little stupid saying it out loud. They didn't laugh. One of them asked to see the garage. I hadn't even thought to check it. The side door, the one that leads from the yard into the garage, had scuff marks near the keypad. It was one of those old numeric lock systems, and the outer casing had scratches around the edges, like someone had tried to pry it open. The officer got down and looked closer. He said it looked like someone had managed to bypass the keypad. Inside the garage, on the floor near the interior door that leads into the laundry room, they found something I hadn't noticed. Tiny pieces of foam, like the kind used to pad out microphone ports. The cop said it looked like someone had been experimenting with muffling sound. That's when it hit me. Someone had been inside. Not tonight, but earlier. Days ago. Maybe longer. He had probably let himself in quietly through the garage, figured out the layout of the house, and placed the monitor back where it had been when my niece was last there. He must have been watching me, listening, maybe practicing what to say, testing how loud he could speak before I'd notice. That "he's awake" line, it wasn't about my niece. It was about me. The police checked everything again. Attic, crawl space, roof access. No one was there by the time they arrived. But whoever it was had clearly planned this. The fact that nothing had been taken, nothing broken. He hadn't come to rob me. That scared me more than anything. After the officers left, I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the living room floor with a kitchen knife in my lap. All the lights on, phone in my hand. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had every lock changed, including the garage keypad. I also had a security system installed, cameras, motion sensors, everything. I threw the baby monitor in the trash that same day. Both pieces. I didn't even want it in the house. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me while I slept, that maybe I'd passed by him in the hallway one night without knowing, that he'd been inches away on the other side of the wall while I read in bed, or cooked dinner, or sang in the shower. that someone had been listening to me live my life in silence, waiting for the right moment to speak. He didn't break in for money. He didn't steal. He wanted to be there, and he almost was. My fiancée was out of town visiting her family for a week, so I had the house to myself. It wasn't the first time I'd stayed alone, and I wasn't the type to scare easy. We live in a quiet neighborhood, decent houses, mostly older couples, some families. Our place is a 2-story with a small backyard, nothing fancy, but we liked it. We'd only been living there for about 7 months. On the second night, I made a simple dinner, just pasta and some toast. Ate in front of the TV while watching a show. When I finished, I went to the kitchen, rinsed the plate and fork, loaded them into the dishwasher, wiped down the counter and took out the trash. Everything cleaned up, no mess left behind. It was a slow evening. I turned in early, read a bit in bed, then went to sleep. Next morning, I got up around 8, walked into the kitchen still half asleep. I remember scratching my head, yawning, opening the fridge, and that's when I saw it. A dirty dinner plate in the sink. There were crumbs on it and a smear of some kind of sauce. A fork with something stuck between the prongs. I just stood there staring at it for a while, like my brain was still loading. Then I shook myself awake, looked around, checked the dishwasher. It was still loaded the way I'd left it. All clean dishes. I didn't eat twice. I hadn't used that plate. In fact, I didn't even recognize it. We have plain white ceramic dishes. This one had a light green rim. Not ours. I checked the cabinets and nothing matched. I felt a weird tightness in my chest. First thought that came to me was that someone had broken in during the night. But that didn't make sense. Why would someone break in, make food, and leave? I checked every door and window in the house. All locked, bolts in place, windows latched. I even checked the back door and the garage. Nothing looked disturbed. No drawers rummaged through. Nothing missing. I walked through the entire house slowly, room by room. Everything looked exactly the same as the night before. I started second-guessing myself. Maybe I was more tired than I thought last night. Maybe I did eat again and forgot. Or maybe I accidentally grabbed an old plate from somewhere. But the thing was, I'd never seen that dish before. And it wasn't just the plate. The food looked like a sandwich had been made. I hadn't eaten bread that night. I hadn't even opened the fridge for anything other than the pasta container. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Felt too vague to explain. I went about the day trying to ignore the creeping feeling that something was off. But it stuck with me, stayed in my head. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound felt louder than usual. I kept the hallway light on, door locked. The next day, I came up with a plan. I decided I'd record the kitchen, just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. I set up my phone on top of the fridge and angled it to cover the main area: sink, fridge, counters, stove. Then I left the house around 6 p.m. to go hang out with a friend. We grabbed dinner and watched a game at his place. I didn't say anything about the plate or what I was doing. I just wanted to know what I'd find first. I got home a little after 10. The house was just as I'd left it. Everything looked normal. I locked the door behind me, went straight to the kitchen, took my phone down, and sat at the table to watch the footage. First, it was just empty kitchen. I watched myself walk out of frame, locking up and leaving. Then, about 30 minutes later, someone appeared. He walked in from the edge of the frame, from the direction of the hallway near the guest bedroom. He was barefoot, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie. My old hoodie. I recognized it immediately. It was one I'd lost a few months ago and thought maybe I left at a gym or something. He looked calm, not in a rush. He moved around like he belonged there. He opened the fridge, took out something, looked like cold cuts and bread, made a sandwich right on the counter, ate it while standing there. No sound, no speaking. After he finished, he wiped his hands on a dish towel, rinsed the plate, and set it in the sink. Then he left the same way he came, back down the hallway toward the guest room. I felt cold all over. My whole body went tense. I must have watched that clip 10 times. It was real, not a dream, not my imagination. Someone was living in my house. I didn't know what to do at first. I stood in the hallway for a full minute before walking toward the guest bedroom. Everything in me wanted to turn around and run out the front door, but I had to see. I had to know. The room looked untouched. Bed made, closet doors closed. Nothing strange at first glance. But then I noticed the ceiling. In the closet, there was a small square cutout, an attic hatch. We never used the attic. It was unfinished, dusty, just insulation and beams. The hatch was slightly open, barely noticeable, but enough to see the outline of the lowered latch. And the little foldable ladder attached to it had been pulled down maybe an inch or two, enough to disturb the dust on the closet floor. I pulled the string and let the ladder come all the way down. I climbed slowly, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. The air up there was stale and warm. The beam of my flashlight swept across insulation and wooden beams, then caught something. A blanket, a backpack, food wrappers, a power bank with a cord still plugged in, some empty water bottles, couple protein bars, a notebook. I crawled closer. The blanket had indentations, like it had been recently used. The backpack had clothes inside, men's clothes, one of my old t-shirts, a pair of socks that looked like mine. And the notebook, it wasn't just random notes. It was a calendar, dates circled in red pen. Some were in the past, days I remembered being home alone. Others were in the future. One of them was today's date. I climbed down without touching anything else, closed the hatch, called the police right away. They arrived within 15 minutes. I showed them everything: video, attic, calendar. They took it seriously, which honestly surprised me. An officer went up into the attic, confirmed everything. They said it looked like the guy had been staying there for at least a few weeks, maybe longer. They found fingerprints, took the items in for evidence, and said they'd try to identify him. I asked them how someone could have gotten in. They said he might have slipped in during a delivery or while we were moving stuff into the house a few months back. Maybe even through the garage one day when I forgot to close it right away. Once inside, he just stayed hidden. Ate when no one was home. Slept in the attic. Used power from an outlet up there. They said it's rare, but not unheard of. The attic access had no lock. Never seemed necessary. But now I understood how easy it was. The police didn't find him that night. He was gone. They checked the neighborhood, but he'd already slipped away. We changed the locks the next morning. I added a deadbolt to the attic hatch, motion sensors, cameras in every room. For weeks, I couldn't sleep properly. Every creak in the house felt like footsteps. My fiancée came back early, and I told her everything. She took it better than I thought, but we both had trouble feeling safe in that house afterward. We ended up moving out a few months later, sold the place, bought a condo on the top floor of a building with 24-hour security and no attic. To this day, I don't know who he was. The police never followed up with an ID, but I think about that calendar sometimes. All those circled days, what he was planning, why he picked our house, and how long he might have been watching us before we even noticed. I live alone in a small one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a quiet building. It's not fancy, but it's mine. The building itself is kind of wedged between two others, and the backside, where my bedroom is, faces this narrow alley that hardly ever gets foot traffic. My bedroom has a sliding glass door that opens onto a tiny balcony. There's no ladder or stairs out there, no fire escape, nothing. It's just a small slab of concrete with a black metal railing. I always kept the door locked and the blinds halfway closed, but I never felt unsafe. I used to think there was no way anyone could get up there. 3 stories is high, and the alley is so narrow there's hardly any room to climb anything. It was a Friday night when this happened. I had just finished work, and all I wanted to do was veg out. I ordered some takeout pad thai and threw on a hoodie and sweatpants. I remember the night exactly. It was cloudy, kind of humid, but quiet. I live in a sleepy part of the city where not much goes on after 10 p.m. My living room lights were on. The TV was playing some mindless show I wasn't really watching, and I was sitting on the couch scrolling on my phone. I'd finished eating, had a beer or two, and was just starting to feel relaxed. That's when I heard it, 3 soft knocks. Not on the front door. From behind me, the balcony. I froze mid-scroll. My brain took a second to process it. I actually sat there for a moment, not moving, trying to convince myself I imagined it. But then it came again, 3 quick, muted taps, like knuckles gently hitting the glass of the sliding door. The hair on my arms stood straight up. I turned off the TV and the living room light. The glow from the screen faded. The room dropped into a dull half-light, coming mostly from a street lamp outside the alley. My heart was pounding. I turned slowly and looked toward the sliding door. From where I was sitting on the couch, I couldn't see the whole balcony, just the door itself and part of the railing outside. I got up quietly and walked toward the bedroom. I didn't switch on any lights. I moved slow, each step feeling louder than it should have been on the wooden floor. I stepped into my room and stopped a few feet from the door. The blinds were drawn halfway like usual, but I could see through the gap. First, nothing, just darkness. The alley below was dimly lit, but the balcony was almost pitch black. I stood there for a full minute, just listening. Then I saw movement. A shape shifted in the far left corner of the balcony, just out of view of the door itself. I held my breath. My eyes adjusted a bit more, and I could just make out the outline of someone crouched down low, pressed into the corner. I could barely see the curve of their back, the outline of their head, and worst of all, I could see their face, just a faint glimmer of skin between the bars. They were watching me through the glass, completely still. I didn't know what to do. My phone was on the coffee table. I turned and crept back into the living room and grabbed it. I had no signal. The bar was gone, not even one. I walked to the kitchen and turned the corner fast, trying not to panic. I opened the drawer next to the stove and pulled out the biggest knife I had, an old chef's knife with a worn-down handle. It didn't feel like much protection, but it was better than nothing. When I got back to the bedroom, the balcony was empty. The corner where the figure had been crouching was just shadows now. I stared through the glass for a while, knife in hand, trying to spot movement. Nothing. Whoever it was had vanished. I stood there for at least 10 minutes before I backed out of the room and locked myself in the bathroom. I dialed 911, and thankfully the call went through this time. I tried to keep my voice calm when I spoke to the operator, but I couldn't hide the fear. I explained what I saw, and they said officers were on their way. I stayed in that bathroom, sitting on the edge of the tub with the knife still in my hand, listening for any noise outside the door. Took the cops about 20 minutes to get there. I let them in through the front and explained everything again, trying to sound as sane as I could. They checked the apartment first, closets, under the bed, behind doors. Then they went out onto the balcony. I stood back, watching from the bedroom. One officer knelt down with a flashlight, inspecting the balcony floor. That's when he called the other over. They didn't say much to me at first, just talked quietly between themselves. Then one of them turned to me and asked if I had been out on the balcony earlier that day. I said no, I never go out there. The small and barely fits a chair. He told me there were fresh footprints on the concrete, still damp from the humidity in the air, but they weren't coming from the sliding door outward. They were coming toward the door, from the edge of the balcony. That didn't make sense. There's no staircase, no ledge, no drain pipe nearby that someone could climb up from the alley. And the scariest part, there were no footprints going back. The officers didn't find anyone. They checked the roof above me and didn't see anything unusual. They walked the alley, checked the side entrance to the building, even asked a few neighbors. Nothing. They said they'd file a report, told me to keep the doors locked, and left after maybe 30 minutes. I appreciated them coming, but the whole thing felt open-ended, like they couldn't explain it either. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, knife on the coffee table, just waiting to hear another knock. But nothing else happened. The next morning, I went down to the front office and asked maintenance to check the unit above me. It's mostly storage, but I wanted to be sure. The guy who went up there came back looking a little uneasy. He said the rooftop hatch was closed, but when he was checking around the air conditioning units, he found something tucked behind one of the big metal vents, a coil of thin black rope. It looked like climbing rope, not something a maintenance guy would leave up there. He didn't touch it. He showed me a photo on his phone. The rope was tied in a loop at one end, like it had been used for anchoring. It had a bit of rust on it, like it had been out in the weather for a few days, but not long. I asked if there were any cameras up there. There weren't. That day, I installed a camera of my own facing the balcony. I also got a thick wooden dowel for the sliding door track so no one could force it open, even if they unlocked it. But for days after that, I couldn't relax. Every night, I'd find myself turning off the lights and staring out at the balcony, waiting for that shape to appear again. I never saw anything after that night. Whoever it was didn't come back. Or if they did, they didn't let me know. What still gets me is how silent they were. How they managed to climb down, probably from the roof without making a sound. No scrape of boots, no grunt, nothing. Just those soft knocks and that face in the dark. I moved out a few months later. I tried to stick it out, but that feeling of being watched never really left. And every time I walked into that bedroom, I could still picture that person crouched in the corner, waiting. I live in a small ground-floor studio apartment just outside the city. It's not fancy, just one big room with a bed, a small couch, a table I use as a desk, and a kitchenette on one side. The bathroom is tucked into the back corner behind a narrow door. The rent is cheap, the walls are thin, and sometimes you hear the neighbors arguing or their TV blaring, but I got used to it. It's not a place you'd expect something weird to happen. That Thursday night started like any other. I work at a copy center, so I usually get home around 7 p.m., tired and hungry. I remember unlocking the front door and noticing nothing off. Everything looked the same as I'd left it that morning. My coat was still hanging on the back of the chair. The dish I left in the sink was still there. My laptop was where I left it charging. I didn't think twice about anything until I went to brush my teeth before bed. I walked into the bathroom and stared at the sink for a second. The toothbrush holder was empty. Just empty. My toothbrush, the blue one with the faded bristles, was gone. I stood there staring, almost confused, like my brain needed a moment to process something being out of place. I checked the edge of the sink, the floor, even the little shelf behind the mirror where I sometimes put stuff when I'm in a rush. Nothing. I even looked in the trash can, half expecting it to be in there by accident, but it wasn't. Not in the shower either. I ran my hand around the tub rim and checked behind the shampoo bottles. Nothing. I told myself I probably knocked it into the trash and just missed it. Or maybe I dropped it earlier and kicked it under the cabinet without noticing. I grabbed the spare toothbrush from the drawer, an old one I kept from my last dental visit, and didn't think much more of it. Weird things happen when you're distracted or tired. The next day went by normally. Work was dull. I was mostly thinking about the weekend. After work, I got groceries, picked up some takeout, and got back to my place around the same time, just before sunset. Everything looked fine again. Door locked, nothing out of place. I ate, watched a couple episodes of some crime show, and eventually got ready for bed. When I walked into the bathroom again, I froze. The toothbrush I'd used last night, the replacement, was gone too. Same holder, empty again. This time, my heart started racing a little. I stood still in the bathroom, staring at the spot where it should have been. I checked the same places as the night before. The sink, the floor, the trash, the tub. I even opened the little cabinet under the sink. Nothing. The door had been locked when I got home. Deadbolt, chain, everything. I live alone. No one has a key except me. I even double-checked the windows just to be sure. They were locked tight too. I felt a little sick in the stomach. Something about it wasn't right. Not like a mistake or a random accident. Someone had to be coming in. But how? I couldn't sleep properly that night. I lay on my side, staring at the bathroom door across the room, thinking, maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe there was a logical explanation. But something about the quiet felt wrong. Too still. I got up once around 2 a.m. to drink water and stared into the bathroom. The lights off. I didn't go in. The next day, after work, I set up my old laptop on a stack of books facing the bathroom. It had a busted battery and cracked screen, but the webcam still worked. I downloaded a free motion detect software, adjusted the light to make sure it could pick up movement, and hit record before going to bed. I didn't expect anything. I honestly hoped it would show nothing and I'd just feel stupid about it in the morning. I barely slept. Every small creak made me tense up. I kept opening my eyes every 30 minutes to check the bathroom door, but nothing moved. I heard no footsteps, no voices, just the usual soft hum of my mini fridge and distant traffic. When morning finally came, I was groggy but still alert. I got out of bed, walked straight to the laptop, and stopped the recording. The footage was over 7 hours long. I fast-forwarded through most of it at first. Just the dark, empty bathroom. No motion detection. Nothing triggered for hours. Until around 2:19 a.m. The software had marked a section. I slowed it down and watched. The bathroom door was already open in the shot. The light from the hallway dimly lit the frame. Then I saw movement. From behind the shower curtain, a hand appeared. Then a face. A man. Pale. Thin. He stepped out slowly, barefoot, wearing just a long t-shirt. His hair looked greasy and flat. He moved with strange carefulness, like he was trying not to make a sound. He tiptoed out of frame. I felt my chest tighten. I paused the video and just stared at the screen. After about 30 minutes, the motion sensor triggered again. The man returned. He walked into the bathroom, opened the cabinet under the sink, reached for something, probably the toothbrush, and tucked it into his pocket. Then he moved back behind the shower curtain and disappeared. The curtain swayed a little as he settled behind it again. I slammed the laptop shut and stood up. My heart was racing now. My legs felt weak. I didn't want to look at the bathroom, but I knew I had to leave the apartment. I grabbed my phone, wallet, and keys and walked out without even putting on shoes. I knocked on the neighbor's door, an older lady who'd lived there longer than me, and asked if I could wait there. I didn't even explain. I must have looked like hell, because she just let me in without many questions. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. I waited in her living room, trying to keep calm while they entered my unit. 2 officers went inside. It was quiet for a while. Then one of them came out and asked if I could come look at something. I didn't want to, but I went. They'd found him. He was still in the bathroom, curled up behind the curtain like it was normal. He didn't even try to run. They said he looked half out of it, like he hadn't slept properly in days. When they searched him, they found both of my toothbrushes in a small Ziploc bag inside a backpack he'd hidden under the tub panel. But that wasn't all. He had other stuff too, not just mine. Other things: lip balm, earrings, razors, hair ties. Stuff I'd never seen before. When I told the officers I didn't recognize those things, one of them looked at the ceiling. There was a narrow crawlspace panel up there, painted the same color as the ceiling, easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. They got a ladder and checked it. The space was barely big enough to lie down in, but it had insulation pushed aside, some crumpled blankets, and more stuff in a duffel bag. Empty food wrappers, a couple water bottles, a flashlight. The guy had probably been living up there for weeks, maybe longer, coming down when I was out or asleep. They think he might have accessed it through the building's maintenance room or attic hatch, then slipped down quietly at night through the panel. The police took him in. I had to give a statement and later give access to the laptop footage. They told me they'd look into any other reports in the building. I ended up crashing at a friend's place for a while. Couldn't sleep properly for a few nights. Eventually, I moved out of that apartment. I didn't want to be there anymore. The idea that someone was living above me, watching, sneaking around, stealing little things, that never left my mind. Even now, in a new place with better locks and a second-floor unit, I still check behind the shower curtain every night, just in case.